Allora, schiaccio OK?
All right.
Allora.
So, good morning. Welcome to this new sessions of Nobumpnocare. I'm super excited to have resumed our international webinars in perinatal care. I would love to dedicate this presentation to our colleague Nicole Miglio, who just had her little one, Berenice. We are super happy that, hi everyone, that everything went well. And now I'm very happy to introduce our speaker. She did a fantastic work in perinatal care. Now I will share with you her bio. She is Dr. Laura J. Nanni. She holds a PhD in philosophy from UCD, where she currently works with the Center for Ethics in Public Life. Her area of expertise is in the field of classical, critical, and applied phenomenology. Her monograph entitled The Porosity of the Self, Husserl's Philosophy of Self and Personhood, was published in January of this year by Roman and Littlefield. She's a philosophical counselor and a philosophical facilitator on Thinking Changes project, which is funded by the Irish government, Department of Foreign Affairs. And she's a member of our network, Nobumpnocare. She's currently working with the maternal health research group in the UCD School of Nursing, Midwifery, and Health Systems on the topic of the embodied lived experience of childbirth and infant-maternal relations within the biomedical model of maternity care in Ireland. Again, we are Nobumpnocare, a network of philosophical counselor, sleep consultants, dietitians, fitness instructors that is there to help people going through their reproductive journey. Laura Jane Nanni is one of our scholars in the network. She's going to present of the lived experience of childbirth, and we are very lucky and happy to have her. So the floor is all yours, Laura.
Susie, it is such an honor to be here today. It's also just an incredible thrill to be part of what can only be described as an incredibly important and powerful network that you've put together, yourself and Nicole, and the amount of women who will benefit from the work that you are currently doing is, fingers crossed, it will be transformative, I have no doubt. So just thank you so much for giving us all this opportunity and for giving me this opportunity to share my work here today with everybody. So I won't speak too much more. I'll just kind of crack on with the presentation, everybody. So prior to beginning, I just want to thank you all so much again for coming along today virtually, wherever you are in the world. It really means a great deal to me, as this has been something I've worked on now for almost 2 years. And I'm finally getting it to put it out into the world. So I suppose without further ado, I shall begin. Also, this is an exclusively oral presentation. My apologies for not having any visuals or slide support. So I really hope you're able to stay with me as much as you can through the presentation. So thank you, everybody, and I will now begin. So before I start with my introduction, I just want to give a quick note on the terminology that will be used here today. So the question of equality and inclusion for such birthing persons as surrogates, transgender men, or member of the LGBTQIA+ community has profound social, political, and philosophical implications. In particular, as Andrea O'Reilly argues, the socially constructed meaning of the term mother is rife with implicit biological determinism, perpetuating the grave misnomer that being a mother is somehow innate or second nature to all women. However, O'Reilly's concept of matricentric feminism recuperates the term mother by using it as a transgressive verb to account for all individuals who engage in mother work. In this sense, mothering is understood as a practice that is not limited to biological mothers or cisgender women, but to anyone who does the work of mothering as a central part of their life. Following O'Reilly, I will employ the term mother as a transgressive verb to make it inclusive of trans and non-binary experiences of childbirth. More specifically, I will be using the term birthing mother today to refer to persons who have chosen freely and without coercion to become mothers, as well as persons who give birth with the view to continue mother work. Due to the profoundly traumatic and complex nature of the lived experience of pregnancy loss and stillbirth, I will refrain from including these experiences here, as they require additional phenomenological frameworks to support a more sensitive and nuanced philosophical inquiry. Now, let me begin. So, the prevailing biomedical model of maternity care in Ireland is largely obstetric consultant-led, midwife-managed, and prioritises the medicalisation of childbirth. In this sense, childbirth is primarily treated as a medical condition under constant medical surveillance, rather than a multidimensional embodied phenomenon that is existentially meaningful and ontologically transformative. Implicit in the biomedical model lies a hierarchical structure of care that tends to overly emphasize the obstetric and gynecological dimensions and downplay the ontological and existential dimensions of childbirth. Often clinicians working within the biomedical model tend to understand and engage with birthing mothers through the scientific theoretical lens of parturition, which proffers a causal, functional, material understanding of the physiological process of labour and delivery. However, the medicalized approach implicitly objectifies the birthing mother's body by reducing it to the deeply personal embodied lived experience of childbirth to the biological functions of their reproductive system. It can be argued that the objectification of the birthing body in the biomedical model conflates the distinction between the subjective embodied lived experience of childbirth and the objective biomedical understanding of parturition. This is because the scientific theoretical framework of parturition that is central to the medical model views the birthing body primarily as a physiological object that is predisposed to malfunction. In this sense, the mother's lived experience of childbirth is subsumed into its physiology and treated as an inherently risky medical event requiring clinical monitoring and medical intervention. As such, the medicalization of childbirth and the culture of risk that surrounds it pathologizes such non-medical existential dimensions of childbirth as embodiment, affectivity, intersubjectivity, reciprocity, and sociality that together with the medical dimensions constitute the embodied lived experience of childbirth. I argue the pathologization of the existential dimensions of childbirth contributes to a felt misalignment for birthing mothers between how they experience childbirth and what clinicians tell them they are experiencing. This is because although the medical and existential dimensions are not functionally separable, there is an overemphasis on the clinical interpretation of parturition that conflates objective biomedical assessments with subjective lived experiences of health and well-being for birthing mothers and unborn infants. Consequently, as highlighted by Havi Carel, quote, interventions thought to address lived experiences are often designed to restore objectively measured function, end quote. I propose the felt misalignment for birthing mothers between the medical and existential dimensions of their experience can be best articulated through Carel's phenomenologically informed distinction between the experience of illness and the fact of disease. Carel argues that patients often experience a disconnect between the medical and existential dimensions of their illness due to the biomedical model's problematic tendency to map the scientific theoretical facts of disease onto the deeply personal illness experience. However, from a phenomenological perspective, there is a marked experiential distinction that is often overlooked and can have a significant impact on the patient's capacity to understand how to relate and give personal meaning to their clinical diagnosis. Nevertheless, clinicians routinely conflate the medical and existential dimensions of childbirth and treat mothers with an adequate understanding as their experience is subsumed under the medical view or discounted because they have no formal training. This marginalization of the mother's subjective embodied perspective and the privileged maternal-fetal relation can perpetuate feelings of objectification, alienation, and isolation that often carry into postpartum. Hence, in accordance with Susi Ferrarello, postpartum mood disorders and depression do not exclusively concern the period of time following delivery, but include what precedes the delivery, which can potentially be dangerous for the mother, her partner, and her new family. Although it goes without saying that medicalized maternity care is indispensable given the potential for life-threatening complications, there is an invisible danger within the biomedical model when the pursuit of clinical safety comes at the expense of the autonomy and emotional well-being of the birthing mother. In particular, the lack of recognition afforded to the conflation of the existential and medical dimensions of childbirth has implications for the maternal bond between mother and infant as they transition from tacit to explicit intersubjective intertwinement post-birth. Ferrarello explains that, quote, the empathic bridge in utero that is built between mother and child shapes the way in which they live as human beings in the world, and this needs to be respected as much as possible, end quote. Now, the primordial way we live in the world as human beings is socially, because sociality is the ontological mark of human existence. For Edmund Husserl, sociality is constituted by specifically social communicative acts in reciprocal empathic exchange. Husserl argues the necessary conditions for human beings to establish or build their primordial social way of living in the world together are embodiment, which is the grounding condition for empathic experience, which is essential for the taking over of the second person perspective. That is constitutive of reciprocal communication and mutual understanding that is only possible within a shared surrounding social environment. The argument here is that the necessary conditions for social world building are already being established in utero through the pre-reflexive, affective, communicative maternal-fetal relation within a primordial shared social environment, the mother's womb. These tacit constitutive conditions of primordial social world building in utero are carried over at the moment of birth and mutually expressed through the affective embodied communication between mother and newborn that is reciprocal in essence. I suggest the Husserlian framework for social world building can provide the multidimensional lens necessary to highlight the ontological significance of the existential dimension of childbirth and the postpartum consequences that can emerge in an environment where efficiency trumps empathy in the name of stringent institutional policies and protocols that primarily focus on mitigating maternal fetal morbidity and mortality rates. So, the first part of this discussion will give an overview of the dominant culture and structure of the biomedical model of maternity care in Ireland and explain their impact on the lived experience of childbirth. I will then outline Carel's phenomenological distinction between illness and disease and draw upon her account to explore how the medicalization of childbirth impedes the possibility for mothers to author their own meaning. Finally, a phenomenological account of the lived experience of childbirth and primordial social world building will be provided to illuminate how the Husserlian framework of human sociality could help empower mothers to advocate for increased interpersonal contact, emotional sharing, and openness with their clinicians. It will also strive to highlight how reciprocal communication and mutual understanding are indispensable to the care, assessment, and treatment of birthing mothers in the biomedical model. In accordance with the National Maternity Strategy of Ireland, a model of care is broadly defined as the way health services are delivered through the application of a set of principles across identified clinical streams and pathways. Accordingly, they have devised the 3 pathways to perinatal care, based on the classification of pregnant mothers and unborn infants into 3 specific risk groups. First, there is the supported care pathway, that is midwifery-led and delivered for mothers with normal risk of pregnancy birth complications. Second, there is the assisted care pathway, that is obstetric-led and midwifery and obstetric delivered in medium risk cases. And third, there is the specialised care pathway, that is obstetric-led and obstetric and midwifery managed in high risk cases. The aim of this approach is to provide, quote, a choice of pathway of maternity care for women based on this risk profile, thereby enabling them to seek the most appropriate professional based on their clinical needs. I argue the categories of risk guiding the 3 pathways to perinatal care perpetuates a culture of risk in the provision of national maternity services, because it advances the notion that childbirth is an inherently risky medical condition requiring clinical monitoring and medical intervention. This generates a safety-dominant mindset for mothers that is constitutive of how they understand, relate, and give meaning to their pregnant embodiment and impending experience of childbirth. From a phenomenological perspective, the existential meaning associated with childbirth in the Irish biomedical model is pre-reflexively permeated with reference to safety concerns and vulnerability to risk, thereby prioritising the medical dimension of childbirth from the outset. It should come as no surprise then that the obstetric consultant-led and midwife-managed model is the most popular choice for birthing mothers in Ireland, because as Andrew Hunter et al. Confirm, the vast majority choose to give birth in urban maternity hospitals under the lead care of a consultant obstetrician. A contributing factor to this preference of care stems from the prevailing socio-cultural as well as clinical assumption that medical interventions are not only the norm, but also a safer option, resulting in better outcomes. I claim the driving force behind this common assumption is rooted in the fundamental objective of modern medicine to establish the cause and effect of physiological dysfunction, to diagnose, treat, and prevent sickness, and to mitigate any and all threats to life. From this perspective, it is necessary for medicine to view the human body as a causal functional material object, so it can isolate specific bodily systems and functions, examine their operations, and identify ways to correct dysfunction. In this sense, the scientific theoretical approach in medicine is not just foundational, it is indispensable. It is, of course, also imperative in maternity care, where elevated risks in childbirth demand precise clinical monitoring and timely medical intervention. Now, although its merits are undeniable, the framework of the biomedical model can be problematic when offered as the sole context for birthing mothers to understand and give meaning to their lived experience within a safety-dominant environment where the level of interpersonal care deemed necessary is clinically prescribed. This can create a felt misalignment between how the mother subjectively experiences her medicalized care and how clinicians objectively provide this care through clinical monitoring and medical intervention. For example, Jill Thompson describes Holly's experience of this felt misalignment. When her clinicians told her how she was feeling, Holly said they were saying things to her like, quote, "This is what you need," or "This is what you'll be feeling right now." And it was like, they're telling me what I should be doing and how I should be feeling. I wanted to move as I was in agony, but I was strapped to these monitors and told, "You've got to lie on that bed, you can't move." They restricted me in every way, shape, and form. Thompson further highlights how, in the biomedical model, the supraordination of technology over mothers' bodies radically objectifies them by marginalizing their first-person embodied perspective, as in Holly's case. Thompson explains how this is particularly evident in high-risk situations where clinicians are rushing in and out to attend to machines with minimal dialogue, explanation, or interpersonal care provided to mothers. This is because the emphasis on safety concerns and risk management explicitly prioritizes the obstetrician's clinical expertise, generating a hierarchical authority over decision-making. Hence, in accordance with Hunter, quote, this hierarchy is reinforced through an emphasis on safety. So the decision-making influence of doctors is placed ahead of midwives, with birthing mothers themselves subordinate to all professional decision-making. The asymmetrical relationality between obstetricians, clinicians, and birthing mothers has existential consequences relative to the primordial social world-building capabilities of mother and infant. This is because, as already outlined in the introduction, the Husserlian framework of social world-building includes, but is not limited to, embodiment, empathic experience, reciprocal communicative relations, and mutual understanding. However, such constitutive conditions are ostensibly absent in the safety-first hierarchical approach to maternity care in the biomedical model. In accordance with the 2018 Participatory Action Research Study conducted by Denise O'Brien et al., reciprocity in communication and mutuality in understanding with clinicians emerge as key factors constitutive of the birthing mother's ability to exercise informed choice and be actively involved in decision-making. These elements were shown to have a positive impact on the mother's self-esteem, which gave them the confidence needed to trust their innate maternal instincts and bodily intuitions, and to feel empowered to advocate for themselves and their birthing experience. Such positive interpersonal relations between clinicians and birthing mothers are established through reciprocal relations of mutual understanding, which have a direct impact on the social world-building capabilities of the newborn and their mother as the guide into their shared social world. This is because when mothers feel supported and encouraged to actualize their preferred choices through effective communication with caregivers and experience mutually trusting relationships, the constitutive conditions for social world building are already in full effect. Now, the problem here is that such necessary conditions as embodiment, empathy, and reciprocity are routinely missing from the medicalized framework of parturition used by clinicians in their medical assessment and treatment of the birthing mother. This has significant ontological implications for primordial social world building, as it precludes the possibility of basic level empathic experience due to the clinician's perception of the birthing mother as a material object and not as a meaningful embodied subject. This mitigates the intentional motivation for the clinician to take over the second person perspective of the mother, which is the grounding condition for reciprocal communication and mutual understanding. Consequently, the experiential gap between the subjective and objective assessments of health, the prioritization of the obstetrician's clinical expertise, and the subordination of the birthing mother's privileged embodied perspective creates an over-reliance on the clinical insight of medical professionals. In this sense, it can be argued in line with Adrian Rich that the hierarchical structure of maternity care sends the message to birthing mothers that knowledge of their bodies is a matter for the experts and that childbirth is the speciality of the obstetrician. This perpetuates feelings of confusion, alienation, and isolation for birthing mothers from themselves, their bodies, their babies, and their surroundings that often carry over into life postpartum. I argue Carel's phenomenological distinction between illness and disease can be drawn upon to further highlight the problematic conflation of the experience of childbirth and the event of parturition in medicalized maternity care. This is because in both cases, clinicians routinely try to map narrow scientific data onto complex embodied lived experiences and give objective medicalized meaning to a profoundly subjective situation. However, as Carel's argument will eloquently demonstrate, one simply cannot be directly mapped onto the other, as they are constitutionally distinct phenomena. Carel gives an example of her experience receiving the devastating news of her life-threatening diagnosis in a medical environment, to highlight how she felt a misalignment between her experience of illness and the fact of her disease. She explains how, quote, I was sent home to try to piece together what suddenly became a shattered life. My overall feeling was one of extreme isolation and confusion because the medical and existential dimensions of my illness did not engage with one another. It goes without saying, the physician's clinical explanation of the physiological dysfunction of her disease was paramount, as its life-threatening nature necessitated immediate and extensive clinical monitoring and medical intervention. Carel's argument is that the medical framework through which the life-changing nature of the disease was presented to her was of little use to help her understand, contextualize, and give personal meaning to her lived experience of this illness in her daily life. To further demonstrate this phenomenon, Carel provides an example of a person diagnosed with early stage cancer. She describes how the person may not have had any symptoms or knowledge of the cancer prior to their diagnosis, which makes them diseased but not ill, as they have yet to experience illness. Conversely, a person who is severely depressed and cannot function in daily life, yet has no clinical evidence of a brain lesion, for example, is ill but not diseased. In this sense, Carel summarizes that, quote, disease is to illness what our physical body is to our body as it is lived and experienced by us, end quote. Hence, there is a constitutive phenomenological distinction between the experience of illness and the fact of disease that is routinely misinterpreted by physicians and evinced through their interchangeable use of these terms to provide a clinical explanation of existential distress. Now, it goes without saying there are fundamental ontological differences between the experience of childbirth and the experience of illness that simply cannot be compared. Nevertheless, there are analogous existential implications for both embodied lived experiences in the biomedical model of care that are often overlooked and under-explained. In particular, the embodiment of patients and birthing mothers is radically altered as a result of their lived experience, which directly impacts their familiar, habitual, embodied way of living in the world. For example, in Carel's case, the meaning and context of such mundane embodied habits as going to the bathroom, laughing, coughing, or popping to the shop just around the corner have been drastically altered from taken for granted habits to insurmountable physical obstacles. Comparably, the mundane meaning of such taken for granted habits for mothers pre-childbirth can be radically altered postpartum due to pelvic floor dysfunction, for example, that causes urinary and fecal incontinence as a result of such common medical interventions as episiotomies or forceps deliveries. Now, instead of feeling joy when laughing, relief when coughing, or release through physical movement, mothers feel anxious, alienated, and even embarrassed at the very thought of having to experience any one of these normal bodily habits in a social setting. However, the mother's lived experience of such consequences is further complicated by their inextricable embodied intertwinement with the newborn infant. This is because these routine daily tasks are not only physically and emotionally challenging, but also require the mother to continuously adapt their already altered embodied state to cater for their newborn who cannot be left unattended. However, these very real existential consequences are almost entirely overlooked in the biomedical model of care. Elena Niederman highlights that a contributing factor to the dismissal of the existential dimension of childbirth is the fact that, at a conceptual level, it is treated as a medical condition by mothers and an overwhelming majority of the general public. The common medicalized meaning of childbirth is generatively constituted through the communicative passing down from obstetricians to birthing mothers of medical information that is relayed verbatim to their family and friends. Hence, as Sheila Kitzinger states, mothers often, quote, speak so enthusiastically of their doctor and repeat their every phrase with such precision, end quote. This is evidenced in the language used by mothers to talk to others about their subjective bodily experiences, because as Niederman argues, quote, the social norm of childbirth is constructed around the biomedical notion of pregnancy and the adoption of medical vocabulary, end quote. For example, when asked how they are doing, expectant mothers often respond to this very personal question with an objective answer using medical markers to contextualize their response. For example, I just passed the 12-week mark, or the baby is measuring above average, or I'm 5 centimeters dilated, etc. As such, it can be argued in line with Jennifer Scuro that mothers are often alienated from the possibility of authoring meaning in the biomedical model, because there is no realistic language available to help mothers authentically describe their subjective experience without objective medicalized meaning threaded throughout. As noted by Ferrarello, sometimes a mother, quote, who is still learning to understand her body might find it easier to learn meanings that are pre-constituted, because if we do not find the time to create our own, we end up borrowing these meanings from collective ones. However, there is a hidden existential danger when mothers pre-reflexively internalize the medicalized meaning of childbirth. As already mentioned, a majority of mothers in Ireland fully subscribe to and endorse the biomedical model of care, as it is commonly perceived not only as the norm, but also as a safer option. However, as Iris Marion Young points out, intrinsic to the medicalized meaning of childbirth is a scientific objective understanding of the mother's body as a physiological object. So technically speaking, their experience does not belong to them, because their body is a container coming under scientific scrutiny that omits their subjectivity. The argument here is that by prioritizing the scientific theoretical understanding of parturition that inherently devalues maternal instinct in favor of medical insight, mothers often feel inadequate when their birthing experience does not perfectly align with the prescribed framework of the biomedical model. I believe this is because they are wholly unaware that the medicalized framework shaping and informing their personal meaning of the experience of childbirth is in itself the source of their confusion, isolation, and alienation. Hence, a greater awareness is needed of the extent to which the taken for granted norms of medicalized maternity care are constitutive of the felt misalignment for mothers between how they experience what clinicians tell them. I suggest Carel's distinction between the experience of illness and the fact of disease, and the comparable distinction in childbirth between embodied lived experience and biological parturition could offer a powerful framework for mothers to understand how medical and existential meanings are routinely conflated in the biomedical model. By understanding the root cause of this conflation, it could assuage the common veil of indifference, detachment, and distance often experienced by mothers between themselves and their clinicians. Essentially, by elevating the distinction between the medical and existential dimensions, it could help birthing mothers to understand that the scientific medicalized perspective of best practice abstracts the most fundamental constitutive component of all human interpersonal relationality, sociality. This omission in clinical practice is especially critical in the postpartum period because of the detrimental effect that inappropriate treatment can have on mother-infant bonding. Hence, the over-medicalization of childbirth has constitutive repercussions for the birthing mother's ability to primordially build upon the empathic bridge constituted in utero, because the conditions for the possibility of human sociality for primordial social world building are ostensibly absent. However, I argue that by applying the Husserlian framework of primordial social world building to the lived experience of childbirth, it could possibly illuminate for mothers what Tanya Staller claims that, quote, this world is a shared world, and we need engagement and relation with others. The infant exhibits this need in a primordial, immediate, unconditional fashion, and the birthing mother is the guide in this primal world encounter. In agreement with Luna Dolezal, I argue the embodied lived experience of childbirth is, quote, a complex life-generating and kinship-generating experience with substantial social, developmental, and existential significance, end quote, for primordial social world building. Our surrounding communal or social world is constituted through the sociality of selves, living together with other selves who share a common baseline of mutual understanding against the backdrop of a shared social world. In this sense, Husserl argues, quote, the I requires the thou, the we and the other, and a relation to a world which engages it. Therefore, I, we and world belong together. The world is a communal surrounding world, thereby bears the stamp of subjectivity. As already mentioned, Husserl explains that human sociality is established by specifically social communicative acts and is evinced through such pre-reflexive registers of communication as embodiment, empathy, affectivity, reciprocity, and habituality. He argues that our individuality, personality, unique character traits, and abiding habitual style of life can only emerge through our inextricable communicative intertwinement with others against the backdrop of a communal social world. In this sense, Husserl says that we can only know ourselves by learning to know ourselves through the perspective of others. The enduring character of such unique bodily habits as the way we walk, talk, or stand are deeply ingrained bodily habits that passively guide our normal and familiar ways of engaging with others and inhabiting the social world around us. These habits are not acquired through mere mechanical repetition, but are constituted through the temporal sedimentation of our original lived experiences of them. Sediments from these experiences form an experiential layer that builds up over time, thus creating a lasting or abiding habitual embodiment that dilates our way of being in the world. Now, the argument here is that at the moment of childbirth, the newborn already displays a primitive, abiding, embodied habituality that is constitutive of primordial social world building. This primordial embodied habituality is temporally sedimented in utero and emerges postpartum through the affective communicative intertwinement with their birthing mother. Hence, as Jane Leinmer states, in utero, the very structure of the self is forming experientially in relation to its bodily movements within a primordial surrounding social world that is the gestating mother's womb. The intersubjective embodied relationality between gestating mother and fetus establishes a primordial, quote, relationship of communication as reciprocity, where there is a maternal engagement with intentional fetal movement, end quote. Hence, as Sarah Heinma explains, the vital function of the maternal body contributes to the establishment of interpersonal relations of affection and proto-communication between two subjects, the fetus and the mother. Now, it must be stressed here that the affective embodied motor intentionality expressed by the fetus through their abiding bodily habits in utero is not indicative of a primitive form of cognitive self-consciousness. It is pre-reflexive, affective, non-conceptual, and indicates the fetus has developed the conditions for the possibility of an embodied sense of self and not self. As Leinmer elaborates, quote, neonatal self-awareness is not a division between self and other, but rather the newborn infant is capable of a rudimentary differentiation between self and not self. This is evinced through such independent actions as a spontaneous kick or hand reach that are no longer maternally directed and go against the maternal flow of movement. As clarified by Heinma, this implies that the newborn is not a tabula rasa because it already has a primitive type of sensory motor identity and a potential for communication that is relevant to the constitution of primordial social world building. As further conferred by Nicole Milieu, the experience of gestation essentially molds the self-other distinction, and the continuity between our ante and postnatal life can be found precisely in our embodied nature. The embodied element is significant in the context of social world building because, as highlighted by Lisa Gwenther, quote, "The body is the starting point for a world. It forms the basis for our experience of things and our interaction with others," end quote. Gwenther's insight chimes with the constitutive conditions for the possibility of primordial social world building that include embodiment, empathy, reciprocity, communication, mutual understanding, and a shared social environment. Crucially, these elements are already active at the moment of childbirth, underscoring their significance in the constitution of human sociality that is the grounding condition for primordial social world building. In conclusion, this research has strived to encourage critical reflection on the taken for granted norms of medicalized maternity care by making explicit the conflation of the deeply personal embodied lived experience of childbirth and the medical event of parturition within the biomedical model. By drawing on Havi Carel's phenomenological distinction between illness and disease and the Husserlian concept of primordial social world building, I hope to have demonstrated how a phenomenological description of childbirth could help mothers to understand and articulate the misalignment often felt between how they experience what clinicians are telling them. My hope is to elevate the existential dimension of childbirth to empower mothers to advocate for increased interpersonal contact, emotional sharing, and openness with clinicians. I also hope to have highlighted that reciprocal communication and mutual understanding are not just complementary, but indispensable elements in the provision of care, assessment, and treatment of birthing mothers in the biomedical model. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic, Laura. And it's one of those talks we should listen or watch over and over to gather.
Oh God, no.
Yeah, it's dense. It's fantastic.
Thanks.
What I loved most is the connection you make between the biomedical model and what happens postpartum, because we have just, you know, these two categories of depression, baby blues, and why that happens, and mostly hormonal. But yeah, we are blind toward all that happens before, all the surrender of the mother over her body. Exactly. And how hard it is to come back to that body. I mean, I don't know why. Yeah, we didn't put 1 to 1 together yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly. And that's the thing, like this,
surrender completely over her body. Yeah. And then we wonder, why is she so depressed afterwards? And okay, hormones, everything happens. But this is another important slice of the problem. Thanks for bringing that up.
No, I love that you said that, Susie, because that is the whole, but like I honestly, guys, I had my first child 9 years ago. I had my second child 8 years ago. And I have said to anybody who, you know, has asked me why, like where this angle of research is coming from and so on, I said, it's because I've been in 9 years of field research, speaking to mothers, pregnant mothers, mothers in the hospital, mothers who I met in the playground while I was having an existential crisis, wondering, why am I outside with this tiny baby? I don't know what I'm doing. You know, mothers in the elevator when you're in the shopping center who look absolutely shattered with their newborn baby. And you're like, do you know what? I hear you. I feel you. It's a bloody nightmare. And obviously my own experience, I mean, I also experienced postpartum depression, postnatal anxiety and panic attacks during my own experiences. And or the continuous message that kept popping up over and over again, which, as you said, Susie, it's so obvious. It's actually, when you say it, it's so obvious. But we don't seem to get the 1 + 1 = 2, guys, that, well, we can't have had this wonderfully harmonious experience because we're coming from a completely different perspective. We're walking into, from our daily lives, we're walking into this very clinical, medicalized setting, right? Where the people who are looking after us are also in a very clinical, medicalized kind of headspace. And their primary function and aim, and this is, oh my goodness, I mean, I have family who are obstetricians, gynecologists, and physicians, wonderful human beings. This is not a slight on them. This is just saying, it's trying to highlight that their perspective, which is not right or wrong, guys. It's just saying that their perspective is so completely focused on this one very specific aspect of your experience that all the rest that is so profoundly, felt by you, all the rest of the experience gets left unnamed and unexplained. And so it's about saying, look, we're not trying to point fingers here. And okay, obviously, of course, look at, there are huge systemic issues, guys. There are huge political issues, legal. There's so much beyond this. And in fact, I see Miss Sarah Cohen-Shabbat there, hello, Sarah, whose wonderful article about obstetric violence really was just so inspiring and powerful while I was writing this work. And I actually did give an initial presentation on obstetric violence last year, thanks to Sarah's brilliant work. However, you see, what I'm trying to do is sort of get, again, as a true phenomenologist, is to get to the very kind of root cause of the structures that are happening, that kind of build up and that are then leading to these absolutely horrific, issues and consequences of biomedical care, right? But again, they're systemic, they're on a whole other different level again. And I suppose, considering, and as Sarah explored in her own work, considering the enormity of it, I really, at this moment in time, considering all of the women I've spoken to and people I have, been around, I've just tried to find a way that I could now help them. What can I kind of come up with now that can actually maybe have an impact to help people feel just a little less alone, So that's kind of my rambling kind of overview of my sort of reasoning behind, I suppose, taking this particular angle rather than taking a more epistemically informed example or angle, should I say, because again, that is, you're then into a whole other level of very serious systemic chronic issues, especially in Ireland and in our own healthcare system. So that's an addendum there.
Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, everybody, and I'm very happy to be here and to finally meet you also, Laura.
Oh, finally. Hi, Sarah.
Yeah, we will see each other
So lovely to
soon.
see you.
Yeah. And well, I really like your presentation and your idea, and I like this idea of the use of Carel and all this philosophy of disease in order to see birth. Although, of course, we know about the differences, and we have been saying this very much in the research on obstetric violence, how
Exactly.
of course, birth is not essentially pathological, and has
No.
this is one of the important things for the systemic deviances that we are looking at, etc. But I think there is much to do with these models on philosophy, phenomenology of disease, and especially disability. I think I've been using also some disability theory in order to speak about the birthing body, which I think the monstrosity of it, the grotesqueness of it can be understood like very well with this these theories of disabilities and disease. And I'm wondering, I wanted if you could say a little bit more about this, because you use this thing about the experience of illness and from on one hand, and on the other hand, the fact of disease, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if this, I don't exactly know how Carel's uses it, but I have my doubts, of course, on the dichotomy of these two,
Okay.
right? Because you don't have like the experience on the one hand and the disease, the fact of the disease on the other. Many times the experience is also being constructed by of course, the medicalized
Absolutely. Yeah.
conceptualization of the disease,
Yeah.
and what we know also rationally about the disease and the information that we get from the medical authorities. They all construct our experience, right? Our experience is not only what we are
Absolutely.
feeling in the body, but it's constructed by language, etc. So I don't know. I mean, I wonder what would you think about it? Like, if this can be really distinct, or if we are like, if we can do something else, like also trying to, I don't know, to see the pregnant body and the birthing body as a body which is at the same time like phenomenologically experiencing something that it's not, of course, captured precisely by this medicalized model, but at the same time we are, of course, so embedded in it that of course birth is also constructed partly by this understanding. Then thank you, and I mean, good luck with keeping on with this project. Yes.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, thank you so much for your brilliant contribution there and your wonderful question and inquiry. It's so important what you've just raised. So obviously, because this is quite, I mean, this is all my research of over 2 years that I tried to kind of condense into 30 minutes. This particular angle, this whole discussion and sort of utilization of the Carels, so this phenomenological distinction is in and of itself a huge topic, right? And the exploring how it can be used or how it is compatible to sort of what I'm trying to say about the experience of childbirth in a very medicalized setting is something that is well, it's something I have worked on, but actually it needs a lot more philosophical and phenomenological inquiry. Now, to answer your question sort of for now, why that particular, so Carel's distinction, although as I was kind of saying, it's comparable, right? She sort of uses it in terms of actually constructing an entire phenomenology of illness, right? It's grounded in her own lived experience of this chronic lung disease that she's had for 20 years. She's very public about it. She's written about it. She, it's the grounding sort of condition of her work. And she herself uses this type of a framework to put together, as she calls, a toolkit, a phenomenological toolkit for patients, right? To better understand sort of why oftentimes when the clinician tells them one thing, they're experiencing or understanding it in a completely different way. So obviously that is, it's similar to, but it's not directly compatible with what I am saying. But the idea behind the framework that she's using is what I find incredibly fruitful for what I am trying to do. So there is a whole part of this paper that I had to leave out, but it's actually going to be an entire kind of, I suppose, chapter paper in and of itself. Is about the concept of Husserlian attitudes. That actually, I don't know if you are familiar with this, guys, and my apologies if I am kind of, using heavy phenomenological terms. I will break it down as easy as possible because this is the thing about this all, is it's so straightforward once you break it down. And it's so, like Susie said, it's like, oh, obviously there's these two completely, this huge dichotomy going on, So actually, the section that I had to take out for time was, in fact, using the Husserlian concept of attitudes to supplement what Carel was saying, to sort of make it more specific to what I'm doing. Now, I'm going to give you all a really, really quick example that I have shared with a wonderful psychiatrist colleague of mine who really appreciated it, and it's this. If you consider a botanist who goes into a laboratory in the morning and she puts on her white lab coat and she takes to looking at a rose under a very singular lens, and she's looking at this rose from a very particular scientific, narrow, one-dimensional perspective. and she's analyzing the rose and taking data, and it's not a rose, she's looking at the photosynthesis and the carbon and the so on and the so forth. And then that's her day done. She leaves, she takes off her white coat and she goes off home. And as she's walking home, she walks by a rose garden and she smells the roses and she sees the roses and they're beautiful and it's a sunny day and it's all, you know, lovely. And all of a sudden she's reminded, oh gosh, it's my mother's birthday. I have to buy her flowers, and off she trots home. Both of these experiences of the rose are completely distinct. One is from a highly scientific theoretical perspective, and the other is from the fundamental way that we live in the world, the personalistic, the social, the communal perspective, right? So the whole point of that description and this argument is to try and highlight and reinforce even more so, which is why I found Carel's argument to be so useful in what I'm sort of trying to express, is it really is showing, look, it's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole here, because you're talking about an object on the one hand, and you're talking about this kind of lived experiential sort of phenomena in the other. And you can't really compare.
I mean, we can keep the conversation. I mean,
Sorry.
in the future, no, but
yeah.
I think that the example of the rose is, for me, it's a very good example to say precisely what I said before, which is, I don't think this scientist who goes out and then see the rose in the garden forgets, or when she sees the rose, she's also seeing it as a scientist, and she's not in that moment, you know, abandoning the lenses of the scientist and only experiencing the rose in the aesthetic in an aesthetic mode. She might be also thinking, oh, yes, maybe here there is something that I also saw in the lab or something like that. You know, it's like these visions are not so disconnected. We know it about our own, you know, academic, but, you know, you see the sunset and you think also about, I don't know, Kant
the
or
Earth
Nietzsche,
spinning on its axis. Yeah. Sarah, no, your point is absolutely spot on. You're spot on there. And the whole point is that they're two distinct perspectives on the same thing. And it's not saying that one is right and one is wrong, or prioritizing one or the other. It's not trying to say that there is a binary definition of one or the other, right? It's trying to, this idea of attitudes, it's more about how the meaning and the context of the way, so when you're in the scientific way of thinking, right, that particular way that you're thinking also influences sort of the context within which you are, right? And so why this is relevant is when you think of the doctor who leaves their house and drops the kids to school and then goes to the hospital to do their job for the day, right? Of course, they're fully aware that, the kids are in school and they're probably taking a call in between, consulting and so on. But the problem that I'm trying to highlight, this kind of the phenomenon, this sort of, this experience that I'm trying to bring forward using these different phenomenological tools, is that unfortunately they are so sort of, this is where the culture of risk comes in a maternity setting. They're so kind of hyper focused on, okay, morbidity, mortality, what's the life-threatening situation here? How am I going to stay? You know what I mean? And that's the point. And you're right. It's not about saying that one is separate from the other or that they forget the two or whatever. It's the fact that they're so overly focused in the medicalized system on this very hyper risk assessment kind of vibes that they completely forget, oh, but I'm also talking to a person. Do you know what I mean? So I hope that clears it up for you a bit more, Sarah, in terms of, I completely agree with you, but that's sort of why I'm using those concepts to try and kind of highlight that point a little bit.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Then there's Leila and Karen.
Hi.
Hi, Laura. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. We met in Rome last year in August. Yeah, we were in the philosophy of birth section of what was it? World Congress of Philosophy.
Yeah, the World Philosophy World Congress. It was it was amazing.
so yeah, it's good to see you again. And yeah, I'm happy I saw your post on Facebook about the session tonight. I don't have a lot left because my husband is taking care of 3 kids.
I know,
so
and you've had your new baby as well.
Yes, yeah, I had a baby girl. So yeah, she's 5 months now.
I can't believe it. Oh my God. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So I'm here to ruin things. Because
no, please bring it all on. Bring it in, because
so I come from the bioethics perspective, right? So
yes, yes, absolutely.
I 90% agree with you about the biomedical model. I'm quite critical of it as well, and I mean not just for maternity care, but in general in healthcare. I think the biomedical model is too narrow. It's not holistic enough to accommodate all the, you know, the more complex perspective on patient care in general that you need to understand, not things that are, for example, related to person-centered care, which is a more kind of more holistic framework that you can take, that you can use to take care of patients. However, the kind of response, I think there's a lot of women, I agree with you, who are alienated by perhaps not specifically the biomedical model, but how healthcare providers practice within the healthcare system. So it's a very systematic kind of problem. And many women, actually, we see around the world a rise in numbers of women who want to have home births, for example, because they're so scared of going into a hospital. And I completely understand them, to be honest. I'm very sorry if you hear like children crying in the background.
Great. It's like so part of the conversation.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah,
I want to say that. This is personal for me. I'm also alienated by the language around natural birth, and then on the north. Yeah, so it's so the kind of the pendulum swings on the other side. So the kind of reaction
100%.
to the biomedical model that we see, which is like this kind of natural birth movement that has taken, it's almost in a lot of circles, it's kind of cult-like.
It is. It's equally damaging. Actually, it's more
equally,
damaging.
It's
more damaging.
It causes a lot of harm to other women as well who need medical interventions. And kind of course, it sounds good to talk about empowerment of women and kind of releasing them from that control of the biomedical model, from biomedical paternalism. This is my son. He decided to join us. This is Benji. But Mama is talking now. I can't focus on 2 things at the same time.
Keep going, Leila, because this is all exactly what you're talking.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what I'm trying to. So of course, the biomedical model is risk averse. It's focuses a lot on safety. Of course it does, but so does the natural birth proponents, because it's the opposite side, right? They focus on safety of vaginal birth and the risks associated with medical interventions, but not the risks associated with vaginal birth. And yes, thank you guys. Now there are 2 kids here.
I'm only waiting for mine to run in.
I don't even know how I'm gonna work with this.
Leila, I remember. Sorry, because I'm gonna help you. I know what you're saying, because Leila gave the most fabulous talk last August, which also, after I worked with Leila and read Sarah's piece, it was what really brought all of this together for me, because Leila gave the most incredible discussion between comparing it wasn't midwifery specifically, but it was comparing the 2 models, the biomedical and the natural birth movement. And the natural birth movement, listen, I myself, just personally speaking, have been and was, and I'm happy to say I was an advocate for my medicalized childbirth, because I needed to have I had 2 cesarean sections. I was
3.
Yay! How's your C-scar? So I mean, and I have to say that I was incredibly privileged because I had wonderful care, etc. And I overall had a very positive experience, right? But the problem that I find which is the total opposite extreme, which what Layla brilliantly brought out on her slide. I wish I had your slides with me. We could put them up, Layla, because it was so good.
Yeah.
Was that there is this, like, I had serious problems breastfeeding, for example. And when I was in the hospital, you know, and the midwives were doing their best, but it you know, when they're kind of saying breast is best, it really does make you feel so kind of, oh God, I'm a terrible human being because I can't do this. So obviously I'm a terrible mother and, you know, I should just leave now. You know what I mean? The problem is that the natural birth movement is even more chronic in that approach. So in other words, if you don't have a vaginal birth, you're a horrible human being. If you even think of formula, you know, you're not a good enough mother even, you know. And again, the scary thing that Layla brought out about the natural birth movement in her speech, her discussion, was that they actively discourage medical intervention when it's clearly needed.
Yeah.
And that is
yeah, so they do that. So this is a huge issue in the UK. So there was a few reports. Now there's a second inquiry about maternity care in the UK, about birth trauma specifically. But a lot comes out, for example, withholding information from midwives about risks of vaginal birth, downplaying certain risks or not. So a lot of women, around 82, I think, % of women who had injuries related to vaginal birth, for example, did not know that this can happen even to them. So these are really important points. So just so it's balanced, I think, the conversation about it. So the thing that I just wanted to make a quick point, which I think it's slightly problematic, is linking the empowerment and advocating for oneself and shared decision making to vaginal birth and the lack of medical interventions, or, you know, speaking about medicalization only in terms of like a negative connotation to it.
Absolutely.
Because there are a lot of women, because of birth trauma right now, because it has huge momentum in the UK. So a lot of trauma is caused by medical interventions, but a lot of trauma can also be prevented by medical interventions. So personally, I gave birth the first time in Sweden, and they are so anti-medical interventions. They forced me to go through an induction.
Tell them about
to avoid a C-section. Do you understand? Like it becomes,
tell them about the
it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make sense, you know, because they want to have a vaginal birth at all costs. So they try to, C-section is like the worst thing that can happen to you. And a lot of women who do have, especially who have emergency C-sections, end up with a lot of trauma, but also because they're not really prepared for that possibility even. So just to balance things out, to also highlight that there are women who choose medical interventions or choose specific medical interventions to avoid other things taking place in their pregnancy and childbirth. So they choose something to avoid a worse possibility happening, for example. And having that control actually prevents trauma for them, but also it gives them a sense of empowerment that's rarely talked about. Because it's often linked, again, like we said, to this kind of, you know, empowerment in your own body. I think it's important to also understand that maternal intuition and knowledge, this epistemic expertise that women have over their own bodies, also applies to medical intervention. So women who say, I don't think I will make it safely, shouldn't be dismissed as having tocophobia, for example, because this often happens as well. They shouldn't be dismissed as not, you know, and I had this said to me a lot in Sweden. All women say that. And this is, you know, thinking about women as a, you know, monolith kind of, you know, they're the same. They all go through this and they can all do it. The midwives actually tell you that all women can give birth vaginally. This is even scientifically incorrect. Like not all women they cannot. Some women actually cannot physically give birth vaginally. So, I think these are important to always have in mind. Specifically about when women do choose some kind of medical interventions for different, whatever kind of reasons, for need or because they really want them. I think the line is really blurry sometimes between what you need and what you want. But it's important to also maybe not say that they have somehow internalized this kind of. So this is the problematic issue.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
You know how when we want women to be as empowered as they can be and to be part of the public life and society, but women who actively choose to be mothers and stay-at-home mothers, for example, we cannot say that they have internalized misogyny and they have obviously internalized the patriarchal values and stuff like so. It's kind of that kind of analogy. A lot of women actually make rational decisions about the kind of risks that are associated. There's no risk-free birth. There is no matter if you do an intervention, if you decide not to do an intervention, if you are in the hospital or at home or in a birthing center, there's always a risk associated. And I think kind of focusing more about the choice matrix that women have and how they can be empowered to understand different risks and decide which risks they are not willing to take. I think that's the important point. So okay, I'll
Layla,
let you if you want to
amazing.
comment.
But you know what? We'll talk later.
We need.
We'll talk later because
a little shorter because we have some more questions, and I'd like to give the floor to everyone. All right.
Thanks.
No, Layla, that is amazing. And do you know what? Because you and I need to have about a 10-hour conversation because I haven't seen you in so long, etc. But anyway, I will be as fast as humanly possible. Effectively, I love your point that you've raised. It's brilliant because, of course, it is easy at the same time to say, oh, well, you're internalizing this and then, blah, blah, blah. But in fact, it's funny because I myself personally, right, don't feel like I had internalized, medicalized kind of care as, number one, that I was sort of brainwashed in a certain way to think that was the best. I was genuinely delighted because I have had crippling back problems my entire life. And so vaginal birth was just off the cards for me, So in that respect, and that's such a brilliant point as well, is kind of saying that, well, actually there is risk involved in all birth. That's brilliant because it's true, there is. And I suppose I'd love to talk to you more about maybe working out the nuances in sort of what you've picked up on with my work and how I can sort of better address those to make them more, because in fact, I want to say what you are saying, but again, because it is so sort of complex, it's quite hard to not sound, I suppose, as much and all as I've tried not to, it's hard to not sound like I'm kind of sort of advocating for one thing over the other, So thanks a million for your contribution. It was brilliant. And I look forward to many chats together. And thanks for coming.
Karen.
Yeah, hello, and thanks for that, Laura Jane. It was brilliant. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, really enjoyed it. I'll try and be brief, but something that was going through my head while you were talking, and you did touch on it, was, as you know, I work in pediatrics and work largely with autistic kids. Yes. And so two things that come up a lot of the time are, and I think they're linked, and I think you made the link there. One is I'm not a good enough mother. And the other one is a real obsession with developmental milestones. We talk about it all the time. And I hear even doctors and consultants they will name the parent blaming, the mother blaming, and mother shaming that goes on in the professions. But they will also cleave to this very rigid talk about developmental milestones, which I find singularly unhelpful because they're normed against the general population and they don't apply if you're neurodivergent, So I wanted to just ask you a little bit about your thoughts on the way what you're describing in that perinatal care tracks all the way through childhood and even into the adolescent years and beyond, because somebody just has a self-concept of I haven't been a good enough mother and it's my fault that my kids the way they are, and the knock-on effect that has on their accessing of services and all the rest of it and their ability to advocate for themselves and for their child. Does that make sense?
It really does. It's a fabulous point, Kieran. Thank you so much for raising that. So obviously, I mean, what you're talking about and the point that you're making is something that I would love for this research, a direction I'd love for this research to take eventually, because that's the whole point of this, is about saying, well, like, you know, the transformative nature of what's happening. I mean, often, you know, when women say, "Ah, no, I'm grand, like I just had the baby and, you know, everything's fine." I'm like, you've literally just brought a human being into the world, like a whole person. You know, it's not just, you know, as Layla was saying, you know, oh, but sure, everybody can do it and blah, blah, blah. No, it's for each and every person. It is a transformative event on every way, shape, and form. But that in and of itself is so it's so like normalized to the point of almost being a negative kind of conception of what is normal. So in other words, I fully agree with you that there's so much there in terms of like discussing norms and then setting these sort of idealized, even in pregnancy, you're right, you know, these kind of milestones after childbirth. Listen, I mean, you're talking to a person who had, you know, crippling issues, you know, postpartum with my own children, and the good enough mother narrative that almost destroyed me, because I had all of these preconceived notions and this messaging shoved down my throat time in and time again, that, oh, this is supposed to happen and that's supposed to happen and blah, blah, blah. And because, you know, I was, you know, emotionally crippled with postnatal depression and I wasn't able to sort of perform in the way I was expected. I mean, it just fuels the fire and the narrative, and it goes on. And I mean, as it turns out, I also am neurodivergent at the end. I have been diagnosed ADHD as an adult, and it has also, in retrospect, made a lot of things a lot more clearer and understandable now. But I mean, geez, you know, honest to God, I think the point that you've raised is so powerful and important in this discussion, because guys, if we're not just talking about, you know, childbirth, this has an impact on a societal level, because we're talking about human relations and sociality and understanding, and like all the points I'm saying, reciprocity and communication and all these things that in fact are so fundamental to who we are as human beings, but from the beginning of our lives, in a sense, you know, are shaped by the context that we are in and the norms that are sort of presented to us. Does any of that kind of chime with what you were asking me, by the way?
Yeah, it totally does. It totally does, because apart from talking about the objectification of it all, there's a metrification of it, which I think
absolutely
is what's so
brilliant
damaging.
Point.
Yeah.
Brilliant point. Yeah, absolutely. But no, again, Kieran, we'll have to have serious tea and chats next week when I see you.
Yes. I've got very practical things to talk to you about as well that will help develop this.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And thanks a million
Thanks
again
very
for
much
coming.
again. It was great to hear.
So lovely to see you. Yeah.
Chiara.
Hi, everybody. Laura, that was a wonderful presentation. I listened with interest. Full disclosure to everyone else, I have absolutely zero philosophical background. So
that's not true. She's brilliant. She's brilliant.
I come with a midwifery background, and Layla, I was listening with intent, because those conversations about the extremes of medicalization and I don't even know what you'd call it, but the other side is really, really coming up in Ireland at the moment. We've had a huge increase in free births in Ireland at the moment. And I raised my hand before you got to the stage where you were talking about control, which is a huge part of the conversation in midwifery world at the moment. And, you know, we're looking at quality measures, and the traditional one, of course, is morbidity and mortality. But in terms of birth experience, the locus of control and the degree that women feel in control is, you know, a huge predictor of whether or not someone has a positive outcome. And from working in a very, very, very medicalized setting, you know, you see it play out where, you know, someone may come in with an idea about the type of birth they would like to have. And as you said, sometimes things go down a different pathway. But, you know, they may well view that as a positive experience because they were in control of what's going on. But 12 years ago, I did a very small piece of work for my master's in looking at the lived experience of midwives, trying to facilitate that type of care in medicalized settings. So it's kind of serendipitous then that I met Laura Jane, about a year after I have had my own quite traumatic birth experience where I was completely stripped of my humanity and zero self-determination on the outcome of my birth, even though midwife worked in that particular hospital. I'm assistant professor of midwifery, so not that that elevates my station over any other, it just goes to show the vulnerability. And I suppose one of the things I'm really interested in is why clinicians act the way they do, because I'd hope that no one goes into the profession thinking that they want to have this impact, but I know from working in those areas, there is a lot of external pressures, and I think it's important that we name those to better facilitate women being in control. You know, from talking to people who've chosen free birth, from talking to people who move in those areas, a lot of it seems to be down to, I will have more control in my house. And that's if they choose a home birth that's maybe attended by a midwife. That's, you know, one of the number one, high up anyway in the list of reasons why women choose it. Similarly, I think women choose very medicalized birth for the same reason. And perhaps, you know, private obstetric care, because they feel like they will have more control over the outcome and how it happens in that setting as well. So yeah, I'm delighted to be able to work with Laura Jane. I'm listening on with interest. I have the website and the YouTube account now, so it's very useful for me to get perspectives beyond my own profession, because us midwives tend to move around each other. We're still quite a young profession, so I really look forward to seeing what we can do, Laura Jane, and it's lovely to meet you all.
Oh, Ciara, thank you so much for coming. This person is just incredible, and she has been, like, she's kind of transformed the work that I have done. Also, in fact, there is a huge part of my work that I wasn't able to include here, which is in fact about the impact of the hierarchical structure of the biomedical model on midwifery, on the practice of midwifery in the medicalized setting rather than in the sort of natural home birth settings and so on. But Ciara and I are actually doing work at the moment. We're going to be putting together a paper that is sort of, you know, bringing together the bones of what I have been discussing with Ciara's incredible clinical expertise and insight and brilliant philosophical wisdom, by the way, although she may say not, it's completely untrue. You're amazing. But yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you guys, like, there's just so many facets that are involved in creating this experience of childbirth. And it's, you know, like, all of it is relevant and all of it is applicable. And yet, sadly and unfortunately, if it's the natural birth movement or if it's the hyper medicalized environment, it's still this very binary, one-dimensional approach, and there's a right and a wrong, and in fact the complete opposite is the truth, you know. So it's just so lovely to hear so many different perspectives from such a rich interdisciplinary group, because all of these perspectives are like instrumental in coming up with something that is actually viable, that we can use to help women. You know, that's why we're all here, is that we want to help people, you know. But if we don't all work together and see, oh no, there's such mutual benefit in what we all do, then sadly there's so many aspects that are going to get missed. So anyway, thanks again for coming, Ciara.
So this was fantastic. I mean, the input we received, the talk, it's, yeah, I'm really happy to be able to do that. And I'm glad that our children let us do it. We all have 50 homes. It's fantastic. Thank you to the children as well. And yeah, I'm very grateful. We have the recording on YouTube if any of you wants to release and everything. And yeah, this episode was dedicated to Nicole and their newborn, Berenice. So see you next Friday with Christina Gans and informed consent in perinatal care. Another
fabulous
song.
Can I, Susie, can I say just one phrase?
Yeah, of course.
Thing. I just want to say, after also listening to Ciara and also Leila, and just to say that the research has shown us that more than control and autonomy, women in birth want to be cared and want to be seen. and want to be respected, like humanized.
That is it.
Being seen.
That is it.
It's the dignity. It's the dignity.
More than if the birth went as they planned, or with intervention or not, or control. It's really this thing about interconnectedness and care. It has been proven that it's the most important thing. So yes.
Oh, Sarah, I have to just piggyback on what you've just said there, because I've had many kind of conversations with clinicians over the last few months, friends, people that I know who work in very medicalized settings, okay? And when I put this kind of theory out there, and obviously as like a, hey, phenomenologist, they're like, well, what are you, a psychologist? No, it's philosophy. Anyway, the point of it is that they often say to me, look, isn't this theory is all great, but in practice, how does it work? You're in a clinical setting, somebody is bleeding out, you've got seconds to save a person's life and a baby's life. So what does all of this mean? And Sarah, you've hit the nail on the head. It means that if you simply put your hand on the person and you look them in the eye and you go, look, we're in this together. We have 2 seconds to get you to theater. I know this is scary, but don't worry, I've got you. Just let's go. And you give that human contact, that recognition, that tiny little bit of empathy. It takes 2 seconds and you've already made a difference. You've already helped the person to feel seen and less alone.
Yes.
That's how you put it into practice. It's that simple.
Amen.
Amen, sister. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
On this note, I say goodbye to all of you and see you next Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. It means the world to me. Thank you, guys. I really hope I get to work with everybody soon. Really and truly, we got to work together, guys.
I will text you on Messenger. And
Leila, you better. And I need pictures of your children immediately.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Sarah, thank you so much for coming. And I have to respond to you on Facebook, and I will. But I have been like a lunatic trying to prepare for this the last 48 hours. So I will get back to you. We have so much to talk